Okay, hope you can hear me. Yes, guess so. Welcome at the presentation of the OCPP 2.0.1 compliance test tool. It's a long name, so we normally call it OCTT. I'd like to give you a short presentation on what the tool is, and then, of course, get to the demo as quickly as possible. If you have questions, let's do them at the end, also because we have a webcast, so we have some people in online as well watching this. Unless you're higher, we'll try. So let me do a quick introduction. My name is Frederick. I'm the project manager now of the finalization of the tool, and I wanted to get you through. So what are we talking about? So OCTT is an OCPP 2.0.1 compliance test tool. So a tool to test. So what does that mean? It is a test tool for automated testing of OCPP communications. So the tool can test both a CSMS as well as a charging station. We have an implementation of the PDF test cases that will be part of the specifications. I don't think they're published yet, but they will be published. And at this stage, it's a hosted solution. So we have it running in the cloud. You can connect to it, and that way we can you can test your own implementation. So where do we come from? Of course, everybody knows about OCPP 1.6. A lot of people have implemented it or are still finalizing it. A couple of years ago, version 2.0 was published. However, in March 2020, 2.0.1 was published as an improved version, and that's also the version that we are supporting at this moment. So this is specifically a test tool for version 2.0.1, not for version 2.0. We started development at the end of 2020, and since then we've been going through a lot of steps to actually finalize the tool. Mid last year we started the validation of the tool because we want to make, of course, we have to make sure that the test cases are correct. And then in March this year we have started an alpha test with a small group of partner companies. And then as of April this year we have started a larger beta test phase where we actually testing the tool with even more implementations. And of course, in the end, we're working towards getting the tool available and also be able to start the certification of OCPP 2.0.1. So, of course, first of all, maybe good to show we're working very, very closely with a number of producers already. So that's Alphen, Costa, and Trialog, three manufacturers of the charging stations. So you can see there, you can see a implementation of their products there. And we're working very closely with Drives and Vector and on the other side. So those 5 companies are with us already for a year and a half. And we have to thank them for also their efforts to work with us in supporting our testing, making sure that we have our implementation and their implementation at par. And then you can imagine as any development projects you're doing, you find bugs on the other side, and then you're dependent on each other to get things fixed. And that's an ongoing process for a year and a half now, more or less. So these parties are already also, we were testing them before we started the alpha test, and that's also why we started with them earlier than, let's say, the larger group for testing. So where are we right now? Well, at this moment, let me first get back into, the testing and validation process. I think it's good for everybody to realize we are looking at a very extensive protocol, so much more extensive, a lot more options and variables as version 1.6. And in our case, of course, the test cases that we produce and that will be part of the tool must be right and must be flexible as well, because we have to support the different flexibility, the different options that you have in that protocol. So what we also see is OCPP is still being implemented. So that's also making our testing a little bit more complex because we don't have a finished implementation yet to test against. So we're working with moving targets. And of course, we have to also make sure that we expose the tool and the test cases to sufficient different implementations, because as with any product specification, you have different interpretations of that specification. So the tool must be flexible enough to deal with that. I mean, different options, different implementations. Well, there are many variables on our end. And in the end, this tool will be used for certification. I mean, that's the end goal as well. So it just has to be right. So we have a very extensive testing approach at the moment. I'll also tell more about that later in this presentation. Of course, we're testing the tool itself. This is just a front end that you will see, and we also see that in the demo. But more importantly, we're testing the test cases. We're unit testing them. We have automated test cases. Only then we can have them tested against a number of implementations that we, from the 5 partners that we just showed. And then we're also going to alpha beta testing to get more exposure, get more different parties involved. And yeah, this results in, this is our current state as of last month, that we have really a lot of progress. All the green is ready to go on the CSMS side. On the charging station, because there are a lot more variations, there's still quite some work on our end to do. And that's, well, we're now in the final phases to also complete that. I mean, the validation of all those test cases is really the bulk of the work on our end. So where are we right now with the tool? Very briefly, the tool itself technically is finished. The final test cases, they are almost finished, and there are quite a lot of them. So we have about 415 test cases for charging stations. We have only 250-ish test cases for the CSMSs. It's way more than we had in the 1.6 tool. So you can imagine it's also a very long process to get all that right, to test it thoroughly and get this ready. We're getting there. We're currently, as I said, testing 3 charging stations, 2 CSMSs, but the complexity is they're also still working on their side on it. Maybe nice to share, we have in total 8 profiles defined for the different test cases. So all of the test cases, you see the breakdown there to different groups. And we're also working our way down this list to make sure that we get them finished in this order. Obviously, core is more important, and then the additional profiles, as also will be explained later, can be they're optional for the implementers, whether you want to be certified on that or not. Mid-March, we have started this alpha test, just 5 parties, growing to 15 more on the beta test. And I think right now we have latest stats, we're about 2,500 test runs by alpha and beta parties. So we see a lot of attraction there. A lot of people are testing, a lot of enthusiasm on testing these things. I see some of the testers, I think, even here in the audience. So we're testing, and that's the phase we're in right now. We really need to make sure that we have this done right, because we cannot afford any fixes after the certification start. So very briefly, then let's get into the more technical, more interesting sides. So the next steps, of course, our goal is we want to start certification, and the goal is to have the certification started by end of this year. So that's kind of the midterm plan that we are working towards. So we're still validating the test cases, as I just said, work ongoing, and we want to complete at least most of our testing on our end. That means that we have tested them against a limited set of implementations. They need to be exposed to multiple implementations. So that's a process that probably will go on. Also alpha and beta tests, we're using them to increase the exposure, but we're not even sure that that will be sufficient, because something we also notice is that not everybody is implementing everything. So we are really struggling with certain corner cases on the test case side to find an implementation. So we're aiming for a launch in September. At least then we want to make sure that we have the tool available to whoever is interested in it. That also means that the alpha beta test will be extended, at least till end of August. And then you can see here the timeline that we have in mind. So we want to launch in September, and then we'll take another 3-4 months to till the end of the year to really be able to start the certification, and also make sure that we have the tool really at par. That also means that while we're still validating the test cases, as we call it, we'll have 2 types of test cases available. So we'll have the validated test cases, those that we know are right, that have been tested sufficiently. They will be available to anyone who wants to use the tool. And of course, it's not for free, so you will have to take the subscription for that. And then, of course, if you're an OK member, then we'll have an added advantage of gaining access to the still being finalized test cases. So we know they're right, but we need to test them further. So you can also, at the same time, access them and help us testing it as well. So that's the timeline that we are working towards at this stage. So like I said, just a quick introduction, and let's get into a more technical background of the tool. So I would like to introduce my colleague Stan to take over and walk you through the technical background of the tool.
Thank you, Frederik. My name is Stan Jansen. I played a small part in the development of the tool. I will walk you through some of the technical underpinnings of the tool, just to give you an idea. The tool serves two purposes. First is obviously to validate the validity of your implementations, to ensure compatibility across the industry. But the second is that the tool is a very handy thing to use when you're still developing your charging station. You can see where you still need to improve. You can see where you're still not quite compliant. It will give helpful messages about what you should change, and you can use it to incrementally build up your implementation. It is not, however, itself a fully compliant charging station or CSMS system that you can just make your product talk to. So keep that in mind. It was really designed to run the specific test cases that are specified in the documentation. So what's in it? There's 16 modules like authorization, transactions, security, smart charging, etc. There's over 400 test cases for the charging station side, and there's over 250 test cases for a central system side. So a lot of the basics, of course, but also a lot of the corner cases are tested. There's 8 certification profiles, like Frederik just mentioned, and there's also over 150 configuration parameters. Most of these you won't need to change, but this is just an illustration of the flexibility of the tool. So to give you an idea, obviously you can change things like how many connectors does my station have, what are the RFID numbers of the cards that I'm using throughout the tests, which security settings do I use in my product. But there's also more advanced stuff, things to do with timing, things to do with memory, the nitty-gritty stuff. A conceptual overview. So there's a set of test cases, about 400 in this case, and those are embedded in the tool, and you have a user interface that you use to operate the tool. So we use 2 main pieces of external technology. Number one is TTCN3, which is a programming language and runtime specifically for testing communication protocols. It originated at Ericsson in the early 2000s, where they tested like cellular networking protocols, which is at this point a very mature language that is provides you all kinds of concepts for dealing with messages and buffers and timing and things like that. The second is Eclipse Titan, which is based on the original Ericsson implementation. This is an open source implementation of a TTCN3 runtime that we can use and that you can extend with your own specific features. So we used Eclipse Titan and extended that with some OCPP specific things that we need in the test cases. So TTCN3, you get strongly typed message definitions. You can send messages based on templates. You can also match messages that you receive based on templates, so it will validate whether these 3 fields are present or something, or whether this value is in a certain range, things like that. You can deal with timing and sequence order of messages. And as I said, it's extensible through external functions, in our case, Java functions, that you can use to implement all kinds of specific behavior, like the formatting of timestamps, for instance, or in our case, like the composition and comparison of charging schedules, really specific things. The Eclipse Titan runtime is at version 7 or 8 at this moment, so it also has been in use for over 20 years. It's a pretty proven and pretty robust implementation of this protocol. Internally, it will convert the TTCN3 code that you write into Java, and that can then be run on any JVM. And you implement the custom ports in Java as well. So Tom will now give you an impression of how we move from what is specified in the test case document, what that looks like in TTCN3. This is just to give you an idea of what this looks like. Thanks.
Hello. Here we see a test case. At the top, you can see the name and the ID of the test case. So this is B01 cold boot, and then below it you can see the use cases and the requirements that are used in the OCPP document. So what we're actually testing. And then the description describes what the general type of test cases are doing, whereas the purpose is more. Yeah, like okay. The purpose is specifically what this test case is looking for or is validating. Then in the prerequisites, we describe what a charging station needs to be able to do, or what you need to support to be able to run the test case. In the before steps, we look at what you need to do before you can actually run the test case. So in the configuration state, we look what parameters need to be set. In the memory state, we look for a certain ID token if it's in the memory. And the reusable states, they say what OCPP charging state is the charging station is in. And then in the main steps, we do the main steps of the test case. And here we do the validation to see if it actually passed. And then, so we started with the document we saw before, and then there was a script to go from the PDF to TTCN3 code, which was then looked at by a developer to get the first version. Once it was good enough, we had a tester look at it, followed by improvements in the PDF and in the code. And we repeat these steps until we get a working test case. We went with TTCN3 because it's actually designed for what we're doing. So it's designed for testing communication protocols. It's a standard, which means it has certain steps already developed, so we don't have to think about what we need as much. And there are other protocols like ISO 15118 that are using this, which means we can do chain testing in the end. Here we see an alt step where we can wait for multiple messages at the same time. So in the alt step, we describe what messages we're looking for. Here we have the communication with the OCPP part, and we wait for a message of type message, which is then saved in the rec. Here we set the timer, and then here we communicate with the user in the interface. And this is a function we run before running a test case, where we first clear all the previous variables, then set the value to inconc, which is inconclusive. If it fails before doing the actual test, we get an inconclusive instead of a fail. And here we activate the alt step, which gives us general answers instead of the specific ones that we need for the test case. And then this is your part again.
Thanks, Tom. Some of this will become more clear during the demo that we're going to do later. I mentioned configurability. There's many options that you can use. I've been through this. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So you have this tool that's running in the cloud, and you have your system under test. Obviously, these two connect using OCPP. Then there's a user interface that you can use, which we will show you in a minute. And there's some web interface between these. And there's you, the test user. And during the test case, you will be asked to perform some manual actions like swipe a card or plug in a cable, things like that. So that's you're operating your system under test. This is all fine, but when you're developing your own products, you would like to get out of this loop yourself. You would like to be able to fully automatically run these scenarios. So there is a tool API available that you can use to control the tool. So you can like start test cases, change configurations, things like that. And there's a system under test API, which you implement a very thin like HTTP REST layer around your system under test, which can emulate things like, oh, there was someone swiped a card or someone plugged in a cable, or if you're building a CSMS to trigger certain messages or things like that. If you use these, then you can fully automatically run these test cases reproducibly and somewhere in a hosted environment. If you want to go even further, and if you have such a thing, if you have like an EV emulator box that can emulate what the vehicle is doing, like close its S2 switch and things like that, there's also an endpoint for that. So we can even control these devices. And if you put all of this, let me go into a little bit more detail. So the tool API can be used, is a JSON, a WebSocket API. So you can just implement that yourself in like a Python script or whatever you want to use. You can change configurations, you can run test cases, and you get the results as well during the test cases. Via this API, you get everything that you also get when using the user interface. All the progress messages, all the timestamps, all the errors and the warnings, you get everything that you can log to a file or whatever. The system under test API, this is a JSON and HTTP API, which seemed a little bit more appropriate for these one-shot actions. It really replaces all of your manual actions like swiping a card. And you can automate the EV changes as well, or you can trigger messages from your CSMS. So this is not part of the documentation, but this is just to give you an idea. This is, you open this WebSocket connection to the tool separate from the OCPP connection. And this allows you to start a test session. This allows you to start a specific test case where you mention what module and what test case it is. The tool will eventually send you the result of the test, whether it was a pass or a fail or an inconclusive. It logs all of the messages that you see in the user interface as well, so you can use these for your own things, maybe for timing or things like that. And also when the user interface would prompt you for an action, like, hey, swipe a card now, then you can perform that action somewhere in your system and then respond to instruct the tool to continue with the next steps. And there's many, many more than this, including like changing TLS certificates, smart charging profiles. Everything you can do with the GUI, you can do with this API if you want to. The system under test API allows you to automate the various manual actions by implementing a thin HTTP layer. These are some examples. So you configure an endpoint that the tool will post HTTP requests to, things like plugin, plug out, authorize, reboot, things like this. Allows you to automate your charging station. For CSMS, same thing. This is used mostly to trigger messages, things that you would normally do by clicking somewhere in the user interface. You can do that this way. If you put all of this together, like we did, you can fully automatically run through all of the test cases in the entire tool. So this is what that could look like. This is what we do to verify the test cases. And this is, of course, what you'd like to have. If you make any changes to your product, run the test suite again, get instant feedback on what worked and what didn't work. If maybe you broke something, this is really a fantastic aid when you're developing your own products, and you can have this set up with minimal effort through some very simple APIs. Tom will now come back on the stage and tell you a little bit about how we approached these counter tests, which we use to validate the test cases in the tool. Thanks.
There we go. So we use the APIs ourselves to be able to test the tool. The counter tests we used were written in Python, and it allowed us to run multiple tests before actually releasing the build, and it also allowed us to test certain test cases that we don't have a sub for that supports the test case yet. So if we wanted to do security testing, we had counter tests before we had a sub that supported it. And here you see one of them running, and on the left you see the tool, and then on the right you can see the messages come in. So you can see the same thing happening. And then Remy will help with the demo.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So I want to show you something about those D themselves, a demonstration. We will run certain test cases with certain charging stations over here. So let me quickly stop the presentation. So this is basically the login screen where you put in your username and your password. Then you will prompt to enter an OCTT token, which will be sent to your email. And after putting in the OCTT token, you enter on the CSMS screen, on which you can select a CSMS or a charging station, depending on which system you want to test. Now for this demonstration, I start with a charging station. And well, starting testing can be very easy. We have configured a default configuration, which can be loaded. After that, you can create your own configuration. In this case, I will start with Alpha. I create it. And then the only thing I need to do for the first test is basically put in a charger ID. I press save and it will go to the test case run page. Over here we have several buttons. We have the start session button. If I press this, a session will be created and the charging station is able to connect to the system. This can take a little moment for the charging station to connect. The little charge station over here, the Alpha station, is the white one. It's now booting. And in a moment, it will fill in its boot notification. So now we see it's successfully connected. And the boot notification is coming in. So over here, you see the boot notification as a message in. And you see the response as a message out. This is all done by a default responder, which is responding to certain messages like the boot notification, the security event, status notifications, and for example, heartbeat notifications. Now to explain a little bit more about all of the buttons that we have over here, we have the certification profiles filter, which you can select to see only those test cases which are connected to that certification profile. So if I select core, then I will see here only the core test cases. Of course, we have the test case control, which have the drop-down menu with all the test cases. Here you can scroll through all the test cases, or you can use the search window, for example, B20 with a underscore. This one I can select, and then I have several buttons over here. Execute is, of course, to start the test case. Stop would be used if the test case is running and you want to abort it. Show test case is a button which shows the test case document, and it goes directly to the test case itself. Over here, we have also a button to show the test case document, but it will go to page 1 of the whole document. Over here, we have a couple of control buttons. We have auto scroll, auto clear, and pretty print JSON. Auto scroll basically means that during the test case, the tool will automatically scroll to the bottom of the logging window, which is this window. If you turn it off, it will go back to the top. If you press, I should see now. If you press auto clear, then each time you execute a new test case, this logging window will be cleared. And pretty print JSON is, as its name indicates, this is like the normal JSON messages, not very readable, and this makes it readable. Over here we have the endpoint URL, and this is basically the URL that you program in your charging station. And we have a couple of built-in actions for example, some test cases leave the charging station or the CSMS in a state which is not the idle state, and an idle state is needed at the start of each test case. And with these buttons, you can, for example, clear the cache, stop the transaction, and some others. So let's start with the first test case. We will start with this test case is B20. What this basically does is it resets the charging station. So we're going to see, we're going to put a reset command to the alpha station, it's the white station, and it will reset and start and gives a new boot notification. So I press execute. I get information in which state we are. I get our message out to the station. I get the message in from the station, and now we are waiting. It disconnected from the system because it resets. And in a moment, it will reconnect again. We need to wait a couple of seconds. Now it says it's connected again. And shortly it will send us boot notification. So boot notification came in, we accept. Now we're still waiting for the status notifications and the notify event requests. And when they have been received, then we have the verdict is pass. The verdict pass is also shown as green, so it's very easy to read it. The next test case, I want to see what happens if something goes wrong. And we are doing that by not giving the right ID token. So the tool specifically asks for ID token A. We will present ID token B, and of course it's the wrong token. So that is test case E04. We execute it. Now it says use token valid. This one I configured. I press continue. Tom shows a different ID token, which is this ID token. And it's not the right one. Yeah, it does say accepted, but it's not the right one. So we create a fail. Now at this moment, the test case has ended, but of course, the charging station is still in the I am authorized state. So to start the next test case, we need to reset that. But for now, we are going to a different instance, which is the Trialog instance, and that is for now a software stack, so that will be a virtual one, which is already up and running over here. And here I want to show you that we can use the API to start the test case. So on this one is also E03, which is the same test case as we just did. I clear it. Yeah. So I press execute. And now a bunch of messages are coming in. We wait one moment. And the verdict is pass again. Now let me show you what happens with all the messages. So in the beginning, the tool is looking like what is configured in the charging station. So we get a couple of get variables, and if needed, a couple of set variables, because the tool needs to know how to validate. For example, if you have a transaction, you have a different TX start point or stop point, then you behave differently. Well, when these get variables are done, we are sending the API call. That can be seen over here. So this was what we sent, and this is what we receive back. The charging station is responding on it because it is going to occupy it, so a cable was plugged in. That's basically what we want to show you about the API. Now we are going to the last charging station, which is the blue one. It's the coastal version. And on that one, we want to show you, let's see. Yeah, we want to show a complete charging session with a real vehicle. So again, we go to E03. We start the session. We need to plug in the cable on EV side. Cable is plugged in. Now we need to authorize with this ID token. We authorize. We get a couple of messages again. Sometimes you need to wait for the charging station to send all the messages. So there it is, and it's paused because it's charging. Now this is a good example of the test case is finished, and now we need to put the charging station back to an idle state. So Tom just swiped the ID token again, plugged out the cable, and now we are back to an idle state, at least almost, because the local authorization list is enabled in this charging station, so we need to empty it, or first clear the cache. I empty the local authorization list, and now we're ready for the next test case. The next test case is a little bit more of a complex test case. It's clearing a smart charging profile. Which is this one. We execute, we swipe the ID token, we plug in the cable, so again, we need to wait a little bit for the charge station to start charging. Now, what basically happens in this test case is then you set a profile and you try to clear it again. So we have set the profile. Let me look where exactly. I think somewhere over here, set charging profile. It was accepted. Then we clear it again. Then it says accepted. Then we try to get the charging profile and it says no profiles. So it's a pass. Now I need to, we stop the transaction again. We clear the cache and we empty the local authorization list. And the next step is again a sort of a failed test case, but we have two different states within a test case, and that's what I wanted to show you. We are using this test case. So now I'm pressing the show test case button, and it will automatically go to the right test case. And over here you see we have a before state and we have a main state. And the before state is basically all test steps need to be done before we actually are in the main part of the test case. So in this part of the test case, we want to validate something, which can be done over here. But certain steps are needed to get to a certain situation before you can really start testing the main purpose of this test case. What we are going to do now is we make a mistake in the before part, and then we don't get a fill, but we get an inconclusive. So we go back, we start the test case. Now we have swiped the ID token, and Tom is going to swipe the wrong ID token or plug in the cable. That can also be possible. Now it goes to occupied, but it expected a authorized request, so it is inconclusive. Now we want to, I believe, go to CSMS, yes. So over here we have a CSMS ready. And first we're gonna do a test case with a reset. So we will receive oh, it's already there. So execute, and a colleague of mine is operating the CSMS. So please send a reset request. So we got a reset request, it was accepted, and then the tool resets, but of course it's only virtual, sends a boot notification, and the CSMS says, okay, starts notification, okay, so it's a pass. Next test case is a remote transaction, which we're going to do twice. One time with a manual movement on the CSMS, and the other one is by an API call. So we remote, we execute, we send a request start transaction, it's sent, and all the applicable messages are sent, and it's a pass. Now we stop the running transaction. It indicates it will do it in 10 seconds. So now we do update it. I'm not sure why it's taking so long. Should this take so long? Is the transaction still running in the CSMS? Well, something went wrong. As you can see, it's an error. So that's also possible. So if you ever receive any error, then please contact us, because that's some work at our side. Are we able to do the test case again now? I'll go and change to the configuration quickly to enable the API call. So over here we can enable the API call, and over here we can put in the API URL. I save it again, start the session, send the boot notification. This is all passed, so since we are available now, it should be okay again. Press F1 again, it's the same task as we just did, but now with API call enabled. And it's a pass again. And again, as with the charging station, you can see the API calls within the blue HTTP marker. Well, that's basically it what I wanted to show you. One last thing is the report page. So each time you run a test case, you also get a report. And there's some information like the description, the category, the start date, time. And if you download it, it looks a little like this. So it's basically all the messages coming in. You see the info, request, response, message coming in, message coming out, and the API calls. Well, that was basically the demo. I don't know if anyone has any questions yet. I can invite my colleagues to come on the stage. Nog een presentatie?
Ja.
Even kijken.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Remy. Stan, well, I think this is the last, at least, that we wanted to show. So, not sure if Stan and Tom also get on stage, but any questions? Let's. Yes, please. Okay.
Someone go with the mic. Or...
You want to? Yes. We'll give you the.
Oh, yeah, that's also possible.
Hello. Do you have an estimation of the time it takes to run all the core tests?
It depends a little bit on how you want to run them, because with the API, it could be, well, I don't want to say an hour or 2 hours, but at least it's pretty fast. But of course, many of these tests will be manual, and then, well, that takes more time.
Okay.
So we recently had somebody from a test lab here to test, and the estimation was that I think between 50 and 80, 90 test cases on a day should be realistic by somebody that used the tool for the first time. So that's something, yeah, that we need to find out ourselves as well, because that's also for certification, of course, important. We need to start estimating how long this takes.
Okay, thank you very much.
More questions?
Do we have a little bit of time? Because I would like to request if you can walk through the configuration part.
Well, we can do that, but let's not do this part of this session, and we can have a breakout. If might be more people here that are interested in it.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
In the end, it will also be documented in the user manual. So in the end, there will be documentation for that as well. Any other questions?
Not from the public here. Let's check if it's online.
Any questions from online?
Apparently we had some difficulty with the screens, but let's see. Do we have any? We have no questions at the moment. So
I think further communication on the tool will follow, especially we get more close to the launch date. End of August, we should of course announce how people can start using it, start acquiring it. As I'm not sure I mentioned it, but there will be some kind of subscription model, and we're still working that out. That also will be more clear towards the end of August. And I think we have a recording of the session anyway, or that will be published on YouTube for those that missed part of it, because the online session had a small hiccup. Okay, no more questions? Then thank you all for your interest. Tom, Remy, and Stan, of course, a lot of